I have this area in the back of our yard where I have been trying unsuccessfully to get my azaleas to grow and thrive. They've been planted in this spot for I think 3 or 4 years now. Every spring I give them holly-tone fertilizer and I give them a new pile of compost and mulch around them, and I keep them watered, and they still are failing to thrive. They're spindly, they hardly flower, and they're just not doing well. So I decided I'm going to do a soil test, and I just picked this up at the hardware store. This will test for pH, it will test for potassium, nitrogen, and potash. Oh, that's potassium, and phosphorus, excuse me. And so I'm going to conduct a soil test on the soil around these azaleas and see if I can diagnose why they might not be performing well. This is the test that I bought. It's got enough test materials that you can do 10 of each kind of test. And it will test for pH, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium or potash. And I'm just going to follow the directions and do what it says to do. So let me do that. Okay, I have my soil that I've taken from the base of the azaleas down in my problem area. I made sure that I got the actual soil, not just the mulch that was on top of the soil. Okay, so I have my soil. I'm going to put in just enough up to the soil fill line. Okay, so I've filled the soil up to the correct line. Now I'm going to open one of the green capsules. Okay, green capsule. Open up the green capsule and put it into the test chamber. All right, so I've got my soil and then I've got the powder out of the capsule. And now use the dropper, add water. I don't have distilled water, I just have tap water, up to the water fill line up there. Okay. Now put the green lid back on and shake it up. All right, and now it says to let it settle and then allow soil settle and color to develop for about a minute. Compare the color solution against the pH chart, which is right there. So, what shall we talk about for a minute? I do have enough of these. I can do 10 pH tests, and it's important to know that the pH in one part of your yard can be different from the pH in a different part of your garden. And so I'm testing down by my azaleas because that's what I'm having trouble growing, and I want to make sure that my soil is appropriate for the azaleas that I'm trying to grow. So I also want to mention that this home kit is, it's kind of like a pretty good indicator, but there is there's some error possible in these home kits. And if you really want to know what your soil is, it makes sense to send your soil samples off to a soil lab. And you can find a soil lab to test your soil by going to your local university extension office. You can either call them or go to their website. And oftentimes they will actually do soil tests themselves, or as in the case of Maryland, the University of Maryland doesn't do soil tests anymore, but they give you references to the University of Delaware and some places in Pennsylvania or in Northern Virginia that I could send my soil to. So I'm going to do this test and see how it goes for me. But if I still continue to have problems or worries about my azaleas down there, I might actually go ahead and send the soil off to one of the test labs near me. All right, it has settled, and I do see a color. I would say that this is about 6.5. It's not quite green, it's not quite yellow. Let me pull it closer to you so you can see. What color would you say that is? I would say it most closely matches this one here, this pea green yellow kind of color. So that would be pH of 6.5, slightly acid. And if we look on the chart, plant pH reference, azaleas want 4.5 to 6. The higher the number, the more alkaline you are, and the lower the number, the more acid you are. So my azaleas want to be between the red and yellow zones, but I'm already up out of the yellow. So I need to make my soil more acidic. Somewhere I need to add or subtract, excuse me, I need to subtract a half or a whole point of that pH value in order to make my azaleas more happy. So that tells me I need to acidify my soil more. Okay, that's good to know. If I want to lower the pH, I can use iron sulfate or aluminum sulfate. And if I want to raise my pH, make the number higher, I use limestone or hydrated lime. So there you have it. What I have learned today is that my azaleas down there are not quite as acidic as they want to be, so I need to add some soil amendments to the soil down there to make them a little bit happier with their soil pH. So I'm going to use this chart. I'm going to add either iron sulfate or aluminum sulfate to the area where those are going to be transplanted this spring in our backyard renovation. So when that happens, I will put in some soil amendments to make the pH of the soil a little bit lower so that it's more acid. All right, I'm preparing to do the other kind of soil test where I need 5 parts water to 1 part soil. So I used a 1/4 cup measure to measure 1 1/4 cups in here. That's 5 parts of water, and here's a 1/4 cup of soil. So in it goes, and shake it up. Just using an old spaghetti jar, so, spaghetti sauce jar. All right, so I'm gonna leave that to settle, and I'll come back in about, I don't know, half hour, see how it's doing. So it says it can still be cloudy, but the clearer the better. So we're gonna let it settle as long as it needs to. I'm in no rush. I could do this tomorrow if I needed to. It's a beautiful day today, and we are going to do some soil testing. Yay! I did some pH testing yesterday, and I found that the area where I have my azaleas growing are not acidic enough, so I need to be amending my soil for the azaleas to become more acidic. I didn't complete my other soil test yesterday. I've done them this morning because the way you do it, you have to shake soil and water and mix that together at a ratio of, I believe, 5 parts water, 1 part soil. You shake that up. I used a jar. And then you have to let it settle as much as you can. But because our soil is so full of clay, it never really did settle. So I still have pretty cloudy water. But anyway, I've done the other 3 tests so I can see what that soil down there with those azaleas needs in terms of fertilizer. So let me show you what the results are. Okay. These are the 3 tests that I did this morning on the soil sample from near the azaleas. So let's look at them one at a time. The phosphorus test. Now on the camera it looks different than on my with my eyes. You're supposed to shake it up and make sure that all the blue is suspended in the liquid. Okay, so when I look at it with my eyes, it looks to me like the sample on the left compares nicely to the P3 sufficient value on the right, or maybe P2 adequate. The camera isn't showing the color the way I can see it here, so it's definitely not depleted or deficient. It might be adequate, it might be sufficient, so I'm not too worried about the phosphorus value of my fertilizer. Okay, potassium. Now on this one, you're not supposed to shake it. You're supposed to let the orange float to the top the best it will. Okay, and so for this, the color on the left definitely, to me, is depleted. So I need to make sure I have a strong K value on my fertilizer for the azaleas. And then finally, for the nitrogen test, again, this is certainly not adequate. It's either depleted or deficient. In fact, with my eyes, it looks like it's depleted. On the camera, it looks more like it's deficient, but I think in real life, this color value matches best on the depleted. So it needs more nitrogen in the soil as well. So whatever fertilizer I put into the azaleas needs to have strong nitrogen. All right, so that soil test informs me about what to do with the soil with the fertilizer that I put near my azaleas. I'm going to be transplanting them as we do the backyard renovation. And so I know now when I move them, I need to make the soil more acidic, and I need to add more nitrogen and more potassium to the soil. So whatever fertilizer I choose needs to have strong N values and strong K values, but the phosphorus, the P value, is fine. So that will inform me about which kind of fertilizer to put in near my azaleas. Okay, and the soil test that I'm using has one more helpful feature. It's got a chart that shows you recommendations for all three of those fertilizer values. And so you can look at the chart and you can say, if my nitrogen is depleted and I'm planting near lawn or in lawn, then I add this much. I look for this value of nitrogen on my fertilizer. If I have depleted phosphorus and I'm planting flowering shrubs, then I look for this value on my fertilizer. So let me give you a look at this chart. All right, so you can see here, I am planting flowering shrubs, azaleas, and my nitrogen is depleted. So if I look at that leftmost column under flowering shrubs, my nitrogen is depleted. So I'm looking for a nitrogen value on my fertilizer of 14.0 to 14.25. My phosphorus was fine. So over on the right side, under the P column, you can see that flowering shrubs need 1.0 to 1.25. And then my potassium was depleted. So flowering shrubs with depleted potassium need 13.5 to 14.0. And so that means for the fertilizer that I put onto my azaleas, I should be looking for a 14-1-14 fertilizer or something similar. And hopefully that will make my azaleas happier than they have been in a long time. I feel like soil test is something that I've been gardening for 30 years, and this is the first soil test I've ever done. And boy, what a tool that it is for knowing what your garden needs and wants and making your plants happy. So I'm really going to follow the instructions of this soil test. I'm going to add a 14-1-14 or similar fertilizer to the azaleas when I transplant them, and I'll see if that helps. And also I'll be making the soil more acid. So I will be interested to see if that makes a difference in these azaleas' happiness. So anyway, so that's what I'm doing around here with my soil test. I hope that that's informative to you, and maybe you could do your own soil tests and be a better gardener than I have been these last 30 years.